Bonn with Liz Gallagher from CAFOD, and hopefully she's going to be able to talk about climate finance for us a little bit. It's a difficult and tricky issue, something that we've addressed a couple of times. So I guess after Copenhagen, in the Copenhagen Accord, finance was given quite a prominent place. There was this pledge for $30 billion over the course of 3 years, from 2010 to 2012, and then another $100 billion a year, is it, from 2020? So this kind of long-term funding. So I guess maybe the first place to start might be, what's the difference between these two fundings?
Okay, so the difference is that the Fast Start funding is almost a bit like a guinea pig type funding. So it's very much learning by doing, putting money, this is a new issue, not many people have worked on it, trying to experiment and to look at how we can learn lessons so that when we get into the big bucks, we're actually doing the right things, making climate action count, essentially. So it's a kind of, two-year funding stream that really kind of looks at learning lessons, essentially.
Okay. And this $100 billion in the longer term, what's the aim of that?
So that is to kind of do the concrete emissions reductions and to help countries really kind of build resilience and adapt to the impacts of climate change in the long term. So that's what it is. Okay,
so let's try and deal with these two kind of tracks of funding one at a time. This $30 billion that's going to come out over the next few years, we hope. It's been quite a controversial issue here. We spoke to Salim Al-Hook a couple of days ago, and he was saying there's lots of problems. It's very political. Why is it so contentious?
Well, it was contentious because it was kind of used before people were looking at the long-term finance. So it's sort of seen at first as sort of the rich countries trying to buy off the poorer countries with this kind of little promise, and that'll do. But then it kind of comes alongside the long-term finance, which, although sounds a lot, 100 billion sounds a lot, actually isn't a lot in practice, and not all of that will be public finance. So it's not kind of covering the historical responsibility that we want it to. So it's kind of politically charged in that way, the Fast Start finance. But also what we've seen is that countries have been quite eager to sort of repackage old presents that they've given to developing countries in the past and kind of spit them out as climate finance and this Fast Start finance. So it's not kind of very helpful because you're just robbing from to pay for Paul, basically.
So the Copenhagen Accord explicitly says, doesn't it? It says this money will be new and additional.
Yes.
And I guess this is where the tension is. What does new and additional mean?
Well, precisely. I think there's no kind of benchmarks to register what that new and additional is registered against. So some countries count it as one thing, some countries count it as another, and so there's no kind of this benchmark. It has not been mentioned in the Copenhagen Accord. So basically, countries can just say it's new and additional and not have to justify it, which is incredibly unhelpful. And obviously, as aid is dwindling anyway, and people aren't meeting their pledges to meet aid, then actually it's kind of just plundering another diminishing pocket of finance that developing countries so desperately need.
And is this seen as aid, this money? Because I saw a quote in an Oxfam report, which I think we mentioned yesterday, saying this is asking people to pay for this kind of damage is akin to crashing into somebody's car and then saying to them you've got the costs. So what's the kind of conception of this money?
I mean, the developed countries are classing it as aid. I mean, obviously, as civil society, we would say absolutely not. There's a sort of technical term that this is restitution, which is money that's been owed by developed countries to developing countries for the kind of emissions that they've caused in the past and the impacts that this is going to have. So it's essentially a debt. I mean, that's what it is, from rich countries to poor nations, and therefore it's not aid. It's justice.
And the discussions in Bonn, have they been trying to address some of the difficulties surrounding this money? So whether it's new and additional, and I know there's also been a question of how the money should be delivered. Should it be given as a loan or should it be given as a grant? Is this being dealt with?
It's being dealt with at a very technical issue, but not the kind of political crunch issues aren't being dealt with. I mean, we saw, not in the negotiations, but we saw the EU come out last week doing a kind of state of play report on where their fast track finance had got to. And the questions there were raised about, is this new, is this additional money? they weren't very good at kind of coming to answers on that. So it's sort of up in the ether, but it's not being kind of honed in on at the negotiation kind of level in a political way, which is what we need to be discussed at.
And a number of people have said to us, this is actually, one of those issues that's a deal breaker for as far as many poor countries are concerned. This fast track funding is money that they need urgently to deal with the impacts of climate change, which they're seeing now on the ground. And so if these talks aren't making, progress of that, is it a risk that it's going to hold the process back still further?
I don't think it's necessarily the talks that aren't making progress on this. It's the political mandate or the kind of political will. So it wouldn't matter whether it happened in the UN or the G20 or wherever. It's just not going to happen because the political will isn't there. And it's up to us as civil society and the parties that care about it deeply here to really ram that message home to our countries and say, this is completely unacceptable. So yeah, we need to do that.
And so then there's this second track of money, the 100 billion, which is going to come over the longer term. And this was something that I think in Copenhagen they decided to create an advisory group on this finance to work out where on earth it's going to come from. Because although 100 billion is it's a lot of money certainly, and although people are saying it's probably not enough actually when you look at the impacts of climate change over this kind of timescale, especially if we don't manage to limit warming to 2 degrees. It's still a huge quantity of money. So where's it going to come from? And this group have been kind of beginning to address this question. Is that right?
Yeah, so the group is not the same group as the one in the Copenhagen Accord, and the UN Secretary General has made it very, very clear that that's not the case, so to try and kind of detoxify the group's mandate. So this group is set up by the UN Secretary General. It's a group of very kind of high-ranking political figures and people with kind of financial and economic acumen, and they're set up to look at what sources do we need to raise the revenue. So there's lots of different things, from like a ticket levy on when you go on a flight down to some incredibly complicated things called special drawing rights, which is some kind of paper fake money really. So lots and lots of different options, and they're coming to conclusions. They're doing what they call a kind of robust analytical report, and the slight worry that we have at the moment is that this will be a very academic exercise, that they'll just come up with a big long shopping list of all the different options that we could go through, to get through in Cancun. But what we want to see them is coming up with some concrete recommendations, not a done deal. We don't want that. We don't want them to come up with a done deal, but that kind of balance between concrete recommendations that parties can really start to get their teeth into, engage the pros and cons, what the impacts are of these revenue streams.
And this is the group that reported back yesterday. Is that correct? The big meeting that's packed. And I think we showed it live on the channel, so some people may have seen it. But as you say, it was quite technical. What are the different options as far as CAFOD are concerned? Where are the kind of more positive options, and are there any dangers that actually this could have harmful effects? I know lots of the other more technical aspects of these talks concerning forestry, for example, lots of experts are saying, whoa, if we get this wrong, it could be very harmful. Could we potentially see something similar when it comes to money? So what's the good and the bad and ugly of climate finance?
Sure. I think what the group is trying to look at are some of the harmful impacts. So on some examples, there are impacts that, for example, on ticket levies, what would that mean for the small island developing states? Who kind of rely on, aircraft coming in, delivering goods and services, tourism, that type of thing? What would the impact be on those? And therefore, how could you create a mechanism that kind of takes that into account is really key. So that will be a couple of the things that they'll be looking at this time.